Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
And we're live.
Live indeed. I would say we're alive, because that's what I feel right now.
I feel more alive than I did earlier this week.
Yeah.
My kids have...
they've just sucked the life out of you? Is that what you're saying?
They almost did this time. I mean, I feel like they give me so many colds that, they suck the life out of me at times.
The having a really young child around the house in daycare, man, we've had like every single disease that goes around has come through our household.
Yeah.
Every one of them. Some of them 2 or 3 times.
Yeah. Somebody's always got a runny nose or a cough.
Yeah. We're constantly runny nosed.
So we did a earache earlier this week.
Oh yeah.
And had a night with about 3 total hours of sleep, so that was fun. But I think we're all in the mend now.
Oh well, just wait for the next one.
Yeah, that's right.
We've had pink eye and earaches and fevers and coughing and just everything you can line up. Several things that are grosser that I will not mention.
Yeah, thank you.
So
it's too early in the day for that.
Too early. Well, a lot of our listeners, I know that they know that we did a Q&A online. We did it short notice, but we wanted to go back to the audience and see what their questions are. And I know a lot of listeners know that we did that because we got kind of overwhelmed with the questions.
Yeah, I mean, you copy pasted them into this document, and it's 9 pages long, and that was, that was like, what?
And that was after I trimmed a bunch.
Yeah.
So.
And you posted that 16 hours ago?
Yeah,
something like that.
It was last night. It was yesterday evening, sometime, something like that. But
we appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Like, people out there are engaged and giving us information. It's making me realize that we're not content limited. That's for sure. We need more of us. We just can't handle it.
Yeah.
Like, we can't get content out fast enough. That's what I feel like.
Well, what I appreciate too is that there's still so many, and encouraged by really, is how many people are still thinking about turkeys in July.
Yeah. Yes, July. And there's a bunch of folks out there that are they're waiting on turkey season again.
Yeah.
And right now they're like, okay, how can we make more turkeys? Because 2 years from now, they're going to gobble their face off.
Yeah. Well, I'm right there in that boat with them.
Me too. I think that's a swell boat to be on.
A swell boat.
You like that?
Yeah. It was very 50s-ish.
50s-ish?
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking like, the wagon, but that feels like an Oregon Trail or something, So.
It makes you sound like an alcoholic one.
Oh, is that what?
Get on the wagon.
Yeah. Well, one of my former students, he's now a faculty member at Texas A&M. He used to say that he's kind of like, he's on the wagon, but when he falls off the wagon, it's on the side of a hill, and he just keeps rolling on down that hill, but he can't get back on the wagon after he falls off. He'd say that about, different things, like if he was trying to diet or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But, funny. Okay, well, here's what we did. I'd mentioned we screened some out. There were a lot of people who were just giving us feedback. Thankful. One or two comments. They just want us to measure stuff in Alabama's. We could probably keep that up. So
I'm getting to the point where I can do that mental math pretty quickly now. I've got a lot of practice.
Well, yeah. So we when I say screen out, we didn't screen them out because we're avoiding questions or anything like that. It was more because we're getting the same question or similar questions a lot, or that we got questions that are things that we have already covered in detail,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't want to spend time belaboring points that we have already done that in a different episode or in one that's coming up.
Yeah.
So a couple of those topics. One, we had quite a few questions related to field management and some specifics, like what herbicide to use, how to control different kinds of grass problems, or those sorts of things. We did have an episode recently with Craig Harper that we covered that pretty well, and
2 episodes.
Yeah. So in the second part, I believe, is where we had him give us really specific recommendations.
Right. Yeah. So if you have any questions about getting rid of pasture grasses, or how to manage fields for nesting and brooding, go back and listen to that one.
Yeah, because it's good. And I think we addressed it pretty directly there. And
he also, let me get one thing in. He also mentioned, because I saw several questions about food plotting for deer and turkeys.
Mm-hmm.
He talked a lot about that as well in those episodes.
Yeah. Another thing that's related to that, we had quite a few questions about nesting, in terms of nest management, basically habitat management for nesting, or just some general questions about that. Because we've been getting a ton of questions, I think Craig has probably been getting a ton of questions about it too, because Craig went out to a bunch of nest sites in Tennessee and filmed a video that he provided to us that is now on our YouTube channel, on the UF Deer Lab YouTube. So if you need to see visuals of what hen nesting looks like, that's the best resource I've ever seen on it.
Absolutely.
I mean, he went out with his graduate students. They covered basically a wide range of circumstances where nesting was going. They had lots of really interesting information.
They had clear cuts. They had hardwood forests. They had pine plantation. They showed you where the nests were, whether or not they were successful, and where the hen took the brood if they were successful, and what the ultimate fate of that brood was.
Yeah, and then they injected a lot of really good information about habitat management within that whole thing, and it was pretty broad. I've watched it multiple times myself, looking through it. We are planning to do the same thing in the Osceola project, and the folks in Oklahoma have told us they're going to do the same thing out there.
Mm-hmm.
So we should have good information, and if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, we're gonna have these long content videos like that on there, basically across all the subspecies if we can get it, for nesting and brooding, and a bunch of other stuff as well. So if you're one of the people that was asking about nesting and what that looks like, go check out that video. Phenomenal visual, great information on it. We just put it up once this airs last week, and it seems to be a really good resource for folks based on comments and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, was there anything else? Several people asked about harvest management.
Yeah.
So, we're going to cover that directly. That's one I don't think that we have been as direct and thorough about. And we have an episode that's going to come out after the one you're listening to right now, but it's in there. We're covering that well, or at least I think we are. Maybe we'll get some comments telling us otherwise. So anyway, I think we should get to some questions.
Were there any others that? We did get that question that it seemed like many people liked, indicating that they were interested in hearing a response to it as well. And that's, can you walk us through the general process of conducting a field study? And
Yes.
if there is a lot of interest in that, that's absolutely something that we'd be willing to cover, but I think it would be deserving of its own episode.
Yes. So maybe next episode we can devote to just walking people through that whole process.
Yeah.
It's different in different places, but we can kind of give you the
Yeah.
nuts and bolts of the whole process, and then from you know the state agent's perspective and the science perspective, and just designing experiments and the things that
Yeah.
go into that. So, yeah, I think that'd be really cool to cover, and we did get actually several questions about that. So we'll cover that as well. It's good. Good. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, we good to go?
Yes, sir.
All right. Again, we've got tons of comments. We're trying to cover the ones that were really popular or got asked a bunch, and we're not going to be able to do all of them, but we're going to try our best. Maybe
Let's
we
do it.
need
Let's
multiple
go.
episodes of them. Yeah. So, what I guess the first thing, since we've been talking about brood cover and field management and the resources that Harper has helped us to develop. It was also one of the most popular things that was asked about. We got a question. Um let's see, from Rocky_Griggs. I think this was on Instagram, and he basically was asking, would it be based on what Dr. Harper said in that previous episode? What do we think it would be better to have smaller 1 to 2 acre brooding cover scattered throughout a property, or one bigger field, maybe that's the same amount of acreage that's strategically placed within the property?
Hmm. Yeah. So my initial answer to this, just off the cuff, is to have a greater number of smaller brooding
Mm-hmm.
patches, so to speak, scattered throughout the property. And this is based on the principle that we talk about from time to time, called dispersion, or
Mm-hmm.
interspersion rather, and juxtaposition of cover types. And all that
Yeah.
means is how well different cover types that meet a species habitat requirements are distributed throughout the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm thinking is, if if it's a relatively large property, you're going to have hens nesting in different parts of it, and you want to make sure that each of those hens has as proximate or nearby convenient access to
Mm-hmm.
brooding cover as possible when she hatches that clutch off. So I like
Yeah.
the idea of it being well distributed out. In hens, we see, they don't need a lot of space to brood in. They'll brood in fairly small openings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, uh, I'm right with you. This obviously depends on the size of the property, but think about it from a scale standpoint and what you're trying to achieve for that little poult.
Right.
I'm not, once they're 2 weeks old and they're flying and they're fairly mobile, we're seeing them out in some places maybe we wouldn't want to see them,
Hmm.
when they're littler, but they're more mobile. Then that really we've already kind of run through the gauntlet by then. So let's think about it when they're smaller. So several days old, 4, 5, 6 days old. At that point, they're not that mobile. And I know Dr. Chamberlain has put out some stuff about this, talking about how far they could move, and basically the longer the distance that they have to move, the poorer the survival.
Hmm.
So what I'm thinking about personally is, how do I put brooding cover in a landscape where that bottleneck time, that really young poult, will have access regardless of where she chooses to nest. She needs to be able to take that poult to brooding cover pretty close.
Hmm.
And when I say pretty close, I'm thinking less than a couple hundred yards.
Yeah. I mean, you think about poults that are only a few days old. I mean, they could conceivably fall down a stump hole and die. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, it's just like a million ways to die out there on the
Yeah.
landscape. It doesn't have to be a predator. I
Right.
mean, they can just get stuck in a blowdown or a stump
Yeah.
hole or, you know, a root
Yeah.
ball, the cavity left behind that. You know,
Yeah.
there's just so many what you just
Well, and that was one of the things that I was so intrigued about, and I kept watching through it over and over in the video that we posted with Craig
mm-hmm,
because it was, I could visualize what was going on. I think that's one of the things that the audience uh, is valuing it for, is because you can visualize what we're saying right now.
right.
But they had some places that were excellent nesting cover, but it's too thick for broods. And then they had data on where the hen took them
Yeah,
from that. And
right.
in some cases, even they showed one anecdote that was pretty cool, where the hen took the brood like a mile or something. It was a ridiculous
I
distance.
thought it was close to 2 miles.
Yeah, I think it was in at least one of the years it was, and
Yeah,
they lost the brood.
right. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, and then they changed the management, and lo and behold, the same individual hen uh, ended up brooding more nearby where she nested, and then
Mm-hmm.
pulled the brood off.
Yeah,
So that you can, there were a bunch of things like that where they showed examples of what the hen would have to do with the brood after she hatched. So critical that either having them juxtaposed to one another so that
mm-hmm.
they're right beside each other, or at least having some sort of transition that's conducive for her to move between the two.
Yeah,
Craig had another really good clip. I feel like the whole episode has been about that video, but it was really good. Uh, he had another one where he was showing one field that was good for nesting, and in between that and good brooding cover was a closed canopy hardwood stand.
yeah,
And he was talking about how, why would you make her walk through that with her
yeah.
brood?
Which it may be
So
easy for the brood to walk through, but then at the same time, they're
yeah,
completely exposed while they're
right.
going
It's
through it.
easy to die when you walk
Yeah,
through it too. So
right.
that's the problem. And the other thing that I kind of find on this issue that to me, I guess I have some of this. It just comes from me, and I realize I have problems when I reflect on it. The way I'm thinking about it,
Mhm.
we're not trying to accomplish this for one hen.
Yeah.
We're trying to accomplish it for all the hens. So, that obviously varies from property to property, but you at least need to be thinking about having that opportunity replicated many times to give as many hens that opportunity as possible.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
I think the only time where I would consider managing for one large section of brooding cover would be if I had a smallish property. You know, if
mhm,
I've got maybe 30, 50 acres somewhere in there, and I've got, 2 to 3 acre brood patch in the center of that, that's probably adequate because we know how
yeah,
hens space themselves out during nesting.
yeah,
There's just not going to be that many hens in that area. So in that situation, I think you would be okay. But um, and also remember, if you're thinking about giving or you're viewing this as giving up some of these small food plots, because probably these little small openings are likely being planted in fall food plots. Don't think of it as an all or nothing proposition that you have to give up the whole field. Maybe you just manage the border of the field or something like that,
mhm,
so that it does have some brooding cover in it.
yeah. Well, a lot of people you can manage fields in some cases, especially when they're large as a complex. They're
Yeah.
on purpose, always providing both at the same time together.
Right. And this is
But
an important concept too, just in general when it comes to turkey management. Like even when we're thinking about how we want to set up a burn
mhm,
schedule on a property for turkeys. When you take away cover somewhere through fire, because it does temporarily take away cover, a lot of people don't even, think about or realize that. But make sure that you're providing adequate cover that you've taken away adjacent to that they can move
mhm,
into.
yeah,
So anything that you take away or have to set back, make sure you're providing it somewhere else.
yeah, yeah. Very good point. Uh, on a related note, we did get a couple of questions, and it's easy enough for us to throw this out real quick. A couple of people asked how old turkeys can get.
Mhm.
One of the ones that they mentioned, I think it was actually the one we were talking about with the brood, or it may have been the one that they talked about kept getting mowed over. She
Yeah.
basically re-nested 3 times and kept getting mowed. One of the hens was 7 or 8 years old. They know for a fact at least
Right.
that old.
Right.
They're also, I'm forgetting the details now, but someone else that was doing a research project, I think it was in Louisiana. It's one of maybe Brett Collier's students or postdocs or something.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody reached out to me at some point from one of the research teams and said that they had a turkey that they know they had recaptured it, and I believe it was a male in this case, but they know it was at least 7 or 8 also.
Wow.
So I think that's probably on the extreme of age. They probably can live longer than that, but those are the oldest ones that I know of that we know the age is older.
Yeah.
There's probably people that have tagged birds out there in these. I mean, there's tons of tagged birds all over the place.
I've got one.
You do have one?
I've got one right here. I had to pull this up. Jason Hart sent this article to me a while back, and as
Yes,
soon
I
as we
remember
started
that. Yeah.
talking about this, I remembered it. But it was from the Pennsylvania Game Commission and all the turkey tagging and banding that they've been doing over the years. They captured a hen in February 22 that was a recapture trapped for the first time in March of 2012. With the data collected from both captures, they estimated that her age was at least 12 and a half years old.
Wow. So there you go. It's the oldest I know of. I know we have a whole bunch of state agency biologists that are involved in these kinds of things out there. If you know of one that's older, let us know, and we'll mention it on the air if we get more information on that. But yeah, so it sounds like 8 to 12 is possible.
Yeah.
I suspect that's not common, and I
No, I
know
would
that
say,
males definitely aren't making it older than
yeah.
4 or 5 very often.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that most hens are making it 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, that's probably about right. I mean, if you start looking at their survival, you know, we're talking about a
Right.
60 or 70% survival per year.
Yeah.
You know, that starts to accumulate.
But I think,
Some probably
you
above old age.
know, in ideal circumstances, unhunted population or very lightly hunted population, that 8-10 years is probably pretty easily achievable.
Yeah, it's reasonable to achieve that. Yeah,
Yeah.
reasonable chance for turkey too. Okay, well, I think we addressed the field questions with that one. Let's see. Here's another one that was pretty popular. A bunch of folks are asking about disease.
Mm-hmm.
We can't do that justice right now.
No.
We need to do. In fact, we have a whole series planned where we're going to get experts on disease in here. However, to answer, let's see, we had a message from CJ Moore 580 asking if disease could be a cause of the decline in turkeys, and it listed West Nile virus, other insect, mosquito, tick-borne disease, that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, in short, we don't have very strong information on this topic to link disease to productivity.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are quite a few studies that are surveying populations for prevalence of various things.
Mm-hmm.
Many of those, I actually did a little bit of homework on this, trying to figure out what's reasonable. There are a lot of studies that are showing 50+% of the turkeys, and this is most of the time hunter harvested turkeys in the spring, but there are various other sources of data that can come out of it. But it's very common for more than half of them to have something.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's co-infection, so they have multiple things. Sometimes it's only one thing. One of the most common things is LPDV. which we need to probably have an episode on just that itself because there's a ton of work going on that right now. We also talked about in the update episode from the working group meeting. There were several other diseases, like I think Newcastle's disease was one in Tennessee that they were testing for that was pretty prevalent. It was like a quarter of the samples or something like that. So in this case, when it's hunter harvested animals, the animal died of the gunshot wound.
Right.
It didn't die of the disease, although the disease could make it more vulnerable in theory.
Yeah, sure.
So
yeah,
I guess all that to say, from my perspective, diseases could definitely be playing a role. They are prevalent enough. I think we have several people, the North Carolina study, the other part of the Tennessee study. I know there's some up and coming work through Squidus, and I think Mike Chamberlain has some stuff that are challenge studies to look at disease related stuff. There's probably, I know most of the projects ongoing are collecting disease information.
Yeah.
But we don't know the details of what everybody's doing with their data. So we're collecting it in Florida in the Osceola project. So
yeah, I think the best way to answer this question at this point in time is that those data to answer that question are being collected right now.
Yes.
And we talked about that on a recent episode that Chris Moorman and the North Carolina study they've been collecting blood from all the hens that they captured too. And so not only do they have, whether or not they nested, their success, their brood survival, the adult survival, and all that kind of stuff, but they're going to be able to correlate that back to the diseases that bird tested positive for. And several others are replicating that across the country right now. So I think we're going to have answers to it, within the next couple of years.
Yeah. Another tie-in question to this that comes up relatively often is, well, how have the prevalence of these things changed over time? I think there's some obvious problems with trying to do that have led us to not have the data on a whole bunch of them. The main thing is some of these things we haven't ever tested for.
Yeah.
We didn't even know they were a thing, not that long ago with some of them.
Yeah, like with LPDV, for example, I don't think it was discovered in wild populations till like 08, 09.
Yeah, that's right. We knew about it in domestic, but I was reading some stuff about that one that they didn't think it would be a problem or prevalent in wild populations, and then lo and behold, turns out it's pretty common, and it's commonly over 50%. Just that one.
Yeah. The other interesting thing about disease that I think that the average hunter probably doesn't think about, and it was also something that I didn't think about really until recently and appreciate, is that in these studies where we're tagging hens, we're not seeing, or even gobblers for that matter, we're not seeing widespread mortality of birds directly attributable to disease, right? They're not regularly catching LPDV or blackhead or avian pox or something like that and just falling over dead. We're not seeing that. And the reason for that is that a lot of times that is this is like proximate versus ultimate cause of death. And what happens is a lot of times the disease just slows this bird down and then causes it to die of something else.
Yeah.
And so while we may attribute it to a bird getting killed by an owl or hit by a car or a million other different things, maybe that event wouldn't have happened if the bird had not been infected.
Yeah.
So
basically the
that makes it harder to study.
Right. So the disease might be the ultimate cause of death because it basically made the turkey slow or make a poor decision that it would not have otherwise.
Exactly.
So the disease ultimately caused it to die of owl predation or whatever like that. So that really muddies things up. And a lot of the times, we've sampled a bunch of turkeys that came back positive and they looked like normal, healthy turkeys. And, it's asymptomatic.
Wild animals, though, are so crazy.
They're weird.
I even think about animals in general. Like, I think about even when my dog gets sick sometimes, they don't act like we do when we get sick. Like, they just keep on sit there and wallow in self-pity and stuff like that. In fact,
Is that what
in
you
fact,
do?
I do. In fact, I was talking to a biologist buddy the other day, and he was telling me a story about this turkey that he took in and actually submitted to Squidus um, for a necropsy. And so, for those of
Mm.
you that don't know, Squidus is a Southeastern Cooperative Wildlife Disease Study. It's housed at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia, but it's funded by, at least in part, I don't know if it's in totality, but all the state wildlife agencies in the Southeast pitch in to have these scientists that specialize in wildlife disease and to help fund their work. And in return, they can send them diseased animals, diseased deer, turkeys, or whatever. They necropsy it and tell you, what its likely cause of death or
Hmm.
its certain cause of death was. Anyway, he got this bird from this hunter this year, and this gobbler came out. He was strutting, gobbling, doing the whole thing like normal. Bird just falls over dead in front of him.
Wow. Wow.
He does
What are
not
the
shoot.
chances of that? It's
He
got to
he
be
doesn't
low. Like,
he doesn't shoot it. There's no shot in the bird. It gets sent off to Squidus. It comes back as it had likely been struck by a car. It had like some kind of traumatic injury and like internal bleeding. And
wow.
that joker was still out there
He was about to
trying
do
to
it
do
one
the
last
thing.
time, buddy. Here's the last hoorah. Wow, that's crazy.
Just fell over dead. What
Yeah.
would you do? I mean, like, I just can't even imagine if I'm sitting there, watching this bird and he's been gobbling and he's coming in and just,
Mm-hmm.
it goes to
Good
show
grief.
you, that, right up until the end, they fight it.
Maybe that is really uncommon because people are just like, "Oh yeah, I got that bird."
Right.
Yeah, I don't think that's true, but it's funny.
If it happened more often, I'd definitely be made to look like a better hunter.
Yeah, sometimes it's like you just need one. You need a win. Uh, well, before we get off the disease topic, uh, we that's one problem. Well, there's I guess we've already gone through a couple of problems. We don't know how the change in prevalence
Yeah.
has progressed. We also the diseased bird is at greater risk of other things, and maybe sometimes they fall dead. The other thing is maybe they fall dead a bunch, and I mean, what are the chances you're going to find one in the woods?
Yeah, they get eaten pretty quick.
Yeah, especially if that's happening outside of hunting season. But again, based on tag birds, that doesn't seem to be that common. The other problem that I wanted to mention with it that maybe people aren't thinking about, and one of the reasons that I think the North Carolina project will be really interesting is another overlooked part of that's kind of hidden from us. For example, well, this hen has LPDV and she does not nest because of that. She
Mm-hmm.
doesn't attempt.
Yeah.
How would we ever know that?
Yeah. Right.
We have to have a tagged hen that we know to be infected, and then track her, and then we need a lot of them to know that that's attributable to that
Yeah.
pathogen rather
Yeah.
than
We would have to see a statistically significant difference between nesting rates
yeah,
of infected hens versus uninfected hens.
right.
And that takes a while to accumulate that kind of sample size
Yeah.
that you need to say that.
No, so basically, the disease thing is really an interesting topic, but it's also hard to know because you can basically multiply that pathogen direct mortality times all of the indirect ways. Basically, every vital rate could be affected and it would be hidden from us,
Mm-hmm.
other than that direct mortality.
Yeah.
And even that one might be hidden from us some of the time.
Yeah. Well, let me pitch this one back to you. And maybe we're belaboring disease too much, but I think this is interesting. Let's say we do find, significant effects of certain diseases on vital rates. What's the management solution to that?
It depends.
Well, what would your initial response be?
If my initial thought on it is that it's related to density, because a lot of these pathogens are density dependent, and then I'd be thinking about ways not necessarily to reduce density overall, but to reduce concentrating animals so that you have a higher effective density.
Okay. Okay.
That's what initially comes to mind. Like in terms of what can you do about it? I mean,
Yeah.
when it's not practical to vaccinate or
Right.
even something that you'd want to do.
Right.
So basically, we're left with okay, we need to figure out ways to reduce the probability of transmission. And then the other thing would be to increase the condition of
Mm-hmm.
improve the condition of the existing animals so that they can better defend themselves with their immune
Right.
system.
So the first thing that came to mind for me when I thought through this question was adaptive harvest management. Like if you know that there's a disease that's, let's just say, reducing productivity by 25% across the
Mm-hmm.
population, like we need to be taking fewer birds a year because we're not producing as many birds a
Right.
year. But also to your last point, I think, we make sure that the habitat is in such a condition that we give them the best odds of battling through that disease process.
Yeah. So you not only want them to be in high condition, but you also, like for instance, when we were talking about having many places to brood.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you're already kind of spreading them out because now they have lots of options, and you're less likely to have 10 hens all trying to brood in the same spot.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, I think yeah, there are several ways, and probably the gut instinct of people, of what they would focus on might differ, which is why we need to have these discussions. The other thing that you
Was
brought
that
up
the was that the French pronunciation?
was that.
You
What did I
said
say?
you said the way people think about it might differ, but you pronounce it defer.
Oh, I think that's the Alabama version of it.
I thought it was French.
I'm emphasizing the wrong syllable. uh,
I thought it was French, or you were getting back to, you've been taking those Latin lessons.
oh yeah,
A chair.
yeah, a chair. We did get a couple of comments about that too. Uh, you never know what you're gonna learn in here, folks. You
Sorry,
never
I
know.
didn't mean to sidetrack us.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's fine. Uh, what was I talking about? Oh, you brought up another thing that has come up several times, which we'll talk about some in the upcoming episode on uh, that will include the harvest management.
Yeah.
But you talked about the adaptive harvest,
Right.
and I'll remind you of we're gonna try to get maybe Patrick or somebody from the Georgia team that's working on the harvest management uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, study, which I think is in review currently, so it's probably going to be published soon. That's
Mm-hmm.
my guess. Um, they found across a bunch of states that the structure of the season, bag limits, and various characteristics of the season were not affecting the male harvest rate.
Well, I I think I think we need to be careful how we word this. I think it was more of, that wasn't their specific research question, but
Well,
they
yeah,
found that across,
their
I think
their research question was to look at how harvest rate varied across a wide range of
yes. Yeah,
areas.
so
It
they
just
had
happens
data.
that those
Right.
states are managing turkeys differently. There are different numbers of
Yes.
hunters. The season dates are different. The bag limits are different.
Yeah,
So
so they
there's some,
had a bunch of data on gobblers from Louisiana, Georgia, and both Carolinas.
yeah,
And they found that, and of course, without going into all the detail, seasons, bag limits, all sorts of things, hunting frameworks vary quite a bit across those four states, but they didn't find a difference in survival
yeah,
among the four.
right. So I don't think that I said that in a misleading way, but
Well, you were just saying that they I don't know, the way that you led with that made it sound like that was their
yeah,
research
they were
question, that they were.
not. Yeah, we're inferring that based on what they
Yes,
presented.
exactly. All right, we're on the same page. My bad.
Yeah. Well, you need to make sure we are. Somebody out there may have misheard that,
Right.
and that's not what I was intending to imply. But what we can gather from it, the fact that it did not vary that much across the hunted populations in all these states,
Right.
uh, then we're immediately to a different issue of this adaptive harvest management that you just brought up, and it relates to several of our questions.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, one question was, or some questions, but we have one on here that we kept that
That
are related.
we've gotten a lot. We've got a
Yeah.
lot of requests for this topic.
What do you think I'm about to bring up?
Probably the question by Bernard H. Scott.
Oh, yep. What? Go
How
ahead.
do how do decoys, fanning, and other tactics need to be addressed? States continue to adjust bag limits lower, issue fewer permits to non-residents, shorten and move seasons, and so on, but they recorded a record number of kills this season. Should fanning and decoys, I guess banning those, be the next
Hmm.
step?
I think that's a very good question. It's obviously being talked about, at least by the hunting community, and that's kind of why I was going with this. Is okay if we're taking steps, if we decide that male harvest is too high,
Exactly. That's got to be that's
what
the
how
first
are we,
criteria.
yeah, if we decide that's true, which I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but if we decide that is true and we want to reduce the harvest, how do you do that?
Hmm.
And we
There's
talked
lots of
about
ways.
there's lots of ways that have been tried that didn't really end up in less
Hmm.
birds. Now,
Hmm.
some argue that, well, it's the timing of the harvest and it changed the timing, which was the important thing. And that may
Hmm.
be true, may not be. I think the data is being collected to address that directly. Uh, but another way to think about it is to make it harder to harvest.
Hmm.
So, you know, but then we go back to the South Carolina data that showed a similar harvest rate between people that were using fans of some sort
Right.
on decoys. I don't know if it would include fanning in it or not, the way the question was worded. But we covered that in
Yeah.
the recap episode recently. If you want to hear those data that were presented, but that's another way that you could go about trying to reduce harvest if you decide that. So, but when you asked me the question about disease, and you kind of went to that harvest, right? And I went to the other side of that coin, which is
Hmm.
I would rather increase productivity.
Yes.
So when I think of it being a problem, I'm thinking about, well, how do we make more turkeys?
Hmm.
Not let's reduce the take of turkeys. How do we make more? I would
Yeah.
rather go that route personally. I think, uh,
Yeah.
that's a more
Well, I was
desirable.
thinking, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, we're totally in the same boat on that. I always want more opportunity that comes along with producing more turkeys, and I think that should be
Hmm.
our first management action for our game species. But I also, think about living in the real world and being practical. There are oftentimes circumstances where we have to take steps to reduce harvest for a period of time while we're letting the
Hmm.
rest of that stuff catch up,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that is exactly right, and I think we have belabored it, maybe not, but what is the state agency going to do?
Right.
They are limited in what their options are to address issues like that.
Hmm.
So, what we definitely don't want is to lose the interest in the species and hunting and lose opportunity.
Yeah.
But how we go about reducing harvest is
Right.
still something that needs, that we're working on. A lot of
Yeah.
people are.
Yeah. I think that's very
So,
important that we don't lose that interest in hunting because, I
yeah.
mean, obviously we're in a position right now with turkeys where we have much more momentum behind trying to improve habitat quality across their range than we do for, say, quail because
Yeah.
there are so few quail hunters at this point because so many hunters out there just simply haven't had the opportunity to hunt that species.
Yeah, I agree. Well, no, to go more directly back to that question, I mean, everybody, well, maybe not, but I get the feeling sometimes folks roll their eyes when they hear this, but we really need to have data on those practices and how it's influencing
Yeah.
things because we don't have very good data on it. I
And
mean,
that's something that we've been talking about lately is how to design a study to address it. And maybe
yeah.
we could fit something like that into that study design episode that we do coming up. But,
Hmm.
it would be really difficult to record enough interactions with turkeys in such a standardized way that would allow us to make assumptions about how certain types of decoys or decoys used in a certain way actually influences the harvest rate and
Hmm.
therefore the overall adult male mortality rate or survival rate
Right.
conversely.
Yeah. It's a tough question. Yeah, I think we should go. We should talk about that in the study design episode. But that's a reality of the situation. We don't even have data that I'm aware of that suggests that it makes people more successful.
Right.
I think most people would probably argue that some methods are uh, increasing success rate, but we don't have definitive data on it that I have seen. And, we're probably going to get flooded with 40 emails with data sets, and that's fine. If you have something, then we'll cover it.
Yeah.
But I think that that is a reasonable question, and if we get to the point where we're trying to figure out ways to reduce male harvest, uh, we need data on that because that's one thing to
Hmm.
look at. I just
Yeah.
don't. I don't think we
You,
have enough data right now to say anything definitive about it.
the other thing that I think is important to have data on too when making this decision is what hunters' preferences are
Yes.
to maintain hunter satisfaction. And, to kind of parse this down to a simple illustration, we can look at ways to maintain a high degree of opportunity for hunters, give them a lot of time to hunt, right?
Hmm.
But then we have to be very restrictive if we're trying to reduce male harvest during that window. We have to be very restrictive in the method of take that they can use, so that they're not killing birds at a high rate over that extended period of time.
Hmm.
And the question is, would hunters prefer to be very restricted in method of take but have more opportunity to hunt? Or would they rather have severely restricted opportunity to hunt with more
But
unrestricted method of take?
yeah,
Right.
I
Personally,
would.
I want more opportunity to
Yeah,
hunt, but make it harder for me to kill a bird.
I agree with that, but I don't think everybody does.
They don't.
I would love to hear thoughts on that from people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
But
know
that's
if
some,
that
but
has anybody done. Do you know of any survey work that has asked something like that?
not that I'm aware of. I've proposed a study right now to the Alabama State chapter of NWTF, and we'll see if we're able to get that going. That's dependent on a lot of things, whether or
Hmm.
not they can do that right now. And but I think it would be really interesting to have that type of information to see which of the two hunters prefer. And then when you couple that with the biological data, once we get that, that's when it becomes
Yeah.
really powerful, so that we can see,
Right.
okay, this is what hunters really want us to change, or they're most okay with us changing.
Yeah.
But let's also see, is that going to move the needle that much?
Well, and I don't know if the data exists, but Alabama's season change didn't it restrict the method of take up in the first part of the season?
Yes.
So did that actually reduce harvest
No.
in that part of the season?
No.
So there's some evidence right there that it may not
Yeah.
even like that's the other thing you're balancing here, which I want to make clear to everybody. We're trying to take actions in this case if the objective is to reduce harvest. You want whatever your changes are to actually cause that outcome. Otherwise,
Yeah.
why did you make the change? And there
Right.
could be other reasons to make that change as well. But if that's the objective, that's what we want to see. Sometimes we don't know until we make the choice,
Right.
which is frustrating to people. but it's a reality of the situation. Not everything has really robust experimental data on it,
Right.
and
That's a good point, and that makes it difficult to draw conclusions, like with the Alabama example we just talked about. Just because they banned decoy use during the first couple of weeks of the season and harvest went up, that doesn't necessarily mean that that was a failed policy, because increased harvest during that time of the year could have been a function of other things. For example, greater pulp production a couple of years ago,
hmm
right? So because it's not a robust experimental framework, you don't really know
yes,
what drove that increase in harvest.
yeah,
And you can't say that it was necessarily a failed policy. And it's, to say it over again, to beat point of beating a dead horse, we need more data.
hmm I agree. So, uh, yeah, where else? What else we have? You have another one on the
Yeah, let's move on.
yeah. I think this is a good question that was brought up. Let's see, by uh, Smoky Mountain Flyman, and that's
Ooh, I don't
a
have
lot.
that one.
Do it?
I said I don't have that one.
Yeah, you
Oh, there he is. Smoky Mountain Flyman. There he is.
do. Yeah. So uh, a lot of landowners have trail cameras. They're just running them on their property, collecting a bunch of data. And the question here is, how should people use that data to evaluate success, basically, of nesting, brooding, uh, other things related to turkey populations might want to know? So there's your question. I'll throw it to you. How do you use that data?
I don't know. This is a tough one, man. There's a difference. A lot of times when we think about techniques to monitor populations as scientists, we are thinking about them through a different lens than a
hmm
landowner is. And specifically, we're thinking whether the way that I'm collecting data is adequately robust from a scientific perspective to make the conclusions that I'm making from the data,
hmm
right? Did we use adequate methods to address this question or satisfy this objective, right? And so essentially, is it scientifically defensible, right?
hmm
But that is not how a landowner thinks about it when he's running trail cameras on his property. Um, and to address it from the researcher perspective, we really don't have an effective method that's been shown to be very robust thus far of using trail cameras to measure things like nesting and brooding success.
hmm
So I
Well,
would say, so that just that point makes me initially want to say that we really can't do it. But then I think
okay,
about it from the landowner's perspective,
yeah. Well,
and
let
they don't
me
have
let me
that threshold to meet that we do.
yeah. Well, I want to follow up on that, but let me interject one thing here. I don't think in the update episode from the working group we talked about it at all. There was so much information. I mean, we could have done 4 episodes on just the update from there if we wanted
Hmm.
to try to cover. There's so much information, so we can't cover everything. But one thing that was presented on at the meeting that is relevant here is a study that was led by Brett Collier over in Texas, and it was part of a restocking effort in on some WMA. I don't remember the details about that, but they brought a known number of turkeys in, and I think it was 80 is what the number was. It was something like that.
Hmm.
And they put them on a WMA that's essentially an island. They had all the birds tagged. They know where the birds are. They know they're all on the area. And then they did that with a grid of cameras within the area and used a bunch of really common ways that we try to estimate abundance with cameras. And essentially what he said while he was presenting that work at the working group was that basically none of the estimators were very good.
Mm-hmm.
And there was
And
a
the
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say the reason for that is that you
That's
have
exactly
a
what I was
lot of
going to.
turkeys that never show up on camera.
Yeah. And now let's think about that. In this population, they know all 80 individuals. They know everybody that is present. It was in a place that did not have turkeys before that. So they have a known population, and they were able to use that information to get estimates on how many birds they don't detect.
Mm-hmm.
Every other scenario, pretty much where you would try to do this, that you would not know that.
Right.
It's not known how many individuals you don't detect. And because of that, it causes issues with these estimators.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of where and this is estimating abundance reliably.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that you can't use cameras effectively, which we're about to get back to. As a property landowner, uh, whatever, in that context, there are some other things that we might, other ways we might look at that. But if we were trying to estimate just how many turkeys there are in a given place, uh, it presents a real problem. So, not having all of the individuals marked. And then if you think about, well, if I had all of the individuals marked, then I wouldn't need to know how many there are or estimate how many there are because you already know,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's not really practical in almost any circumstance. But it was a good experiment in that context to evaluate ways that we might go about estimating abundance with cameras.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it really difficult. We're trying to figure out ways to estimate how many turkeys there are. And that was a chance to evaluate cameras. And based on what he tested, most of those methods weren't very good. However, I think we should go back to Anna Muller if we can get her on this
Mm-hmm.
show, because she has developed a different way to use cameras that was not tested, but based on their evaluations, seemed to be pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to pick her brain about that. I think a lot of state agency folks in particular might be really interested to hear about some of that work.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's get back to the question at hand from a landowner's perspective.
Right. Yeah. So he's not, trying to estimate abundance with complicated math, right? He's just trying
Right.
to get some trend data.
Yes. I think
Another
that's the
thing,
key word there is trend.
yeah, that's where I'm going with this. And backing up for just a second, though, it's notoriously difficult to get broods on camera, young
Mm-hmm.
broods. Now, when they start getting kind of chicken sized, they're a lot easier to capture, but it's always difficult to get young broods on camera. So, if it were my property, let's just say, my 100 acres, um, I would set up a standardized survey. If I was
Mm-hmm.
really interested in tracking, you're not going to be able to look at nest success. You may be able to make some inferences about nest success based on the poults that you see
Mm-hmm.
in a given year, but you're not going to be able to go back that far in time. And as far as the annual reproductive cycle, so if I had 100 acres, I would set up a you know grid of cameras that I'm going to maintain consistently from one year to the next to record data in areas where hens are likely to take their poults. So
Mm-hmm.
we're thinking about like field edges. And I'm going to be very consistent with that from year to year and just keep the best records that I can possible. And, it's going to be coarse data. But, if you go from a situation where we're on that 100 acres on average, I see two broods a year, and each one of them by July averages, 3 to 5 poults. But then 5 years later, thanks to all these management actions that I'm implementing on the property, I'm starting to see on average 4 to 5 broods consisting of 6 to 8 poults. Then I'm pretty confident that what I'm doing is
Mm-hmm.
paying off.
Right. Well, I think there are a few things to unpack and focus on there. One is it's standardized.
Right.
Two, you are targeting areas that you are expecting to be brooding cover
Hmm.
or used by broods. Three, the broods will be big enough, basically, that they've already made it through the gauntlet. So you should be getting better information on what's more likely to be recruited. But also think about places. I guess, you said field edges, but think about the layout of your property and what you're deliberately putting places in brooding cover, and you might be alternating them between brooding and nesting, like we've been talking about. Like, the year of fire, it's brooding. A couple of years later, it's nesting. So think about that when you're setting up your standard as design, and make sure that you have cameras representing where brooding cover is going to be. And also think about roads. Broods like to use roadsides, especially if they've been daylighted, and you're trying to use that as connectivity. So use those opportunities to have cameras along those roads. And the other thing, especially on the roads, if you just have a camera sitting in the woods on a road edge, the number of detections is not going to be very high.
No.
So it's relatively easy to process, but it also means that you need more effort,
right,
to get a good look at it. So that's the way I would look at it, and then keep a data sheet. So you
right.
can look at how many poults were you seeing per hen year after year, and just kind of, over time you start to develop trends in what that is looking like.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's at minimum stable or increasing if you're aggressively changing things, trying to improve it.
Yeah, and I would be that's the key term there, is long-term trends.
Yeah.
So if you change something on your property one year, and the next year you see that the number of broods or the number of poults within per hen goes down, don't automatically assume that you messed something up and you negatively affected your turkey population. We know that there's, this annual variation in turkey productivity that we don't know how to fully explain.
Mm-hmm.
Bird populations in general fluctuate quite a bit annually, more so than mammal populations. So I would recommend looking at longer term averages, say 3 to 5 year running averages, to see how things are changing over time, rather than comparing, one year to the next, to the next, to the next.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a long term endeavor.
Yes. So don't try to draw inference from this year versus last year.
Yeah. And
Like
I
we
mean,
need
like, the
to.
counter example to the one that I just provided is, we hear from landowners all the time that, I trapped this year and I have the best turkey hatch ever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, correlation is not causation in that case, right?
Yeah.
Maybe your trapping efforts did help. Maybe they
Yeah.
explained a portion of the increase in that poult production. Maybe it didn't explain any of it at all. Maybe it was just vegetation
Mm-hmm.
conditions, or you just had a huge cicada
Yeah.
hatch,
Yeah.
like we just talked about,
Yeah.
So,
By the way, multiple other agency biologists reached out to us about the cicada hatch and have seen similar patterns, and it was not trivial amounts of harvest. One of them was at the state level.
yeah,
They saw a change in harvest based on the 17-year cicada hatch, which to
right,
me does kind of scream insect availability is limiting.
is a limiting
So
factor.
let's think
Yeah,
about habitat management practices that can increase insect production. We've been talking about that a lot. Uh,
right.
we've also been going on for an hour now. We've gotten through about
4 or 5.
2% of the questions. I think we ended up with 102 overall. Isn't that amazing? In
Yeah,
like 12 hours. Yeah, we just can't get to everybody. We're trying our best. If we didn't get to your question, I'm sorry. But here's another one that we can kind of bundle several things together. We got several questions about the timing of fire, and Wild Turkey Report articulated a question talking about the benefits of burning during the fall to turkeys. And it kind of goes with another question that we got from a listener that was about controlling Sericea, which brings me to a conversation I just recently had a week or two ago with Dwayne Elmore. We need to get him back on the show to talk about this in detail. but it's relevant here because he was working with a bunch of landowners. He works with landowners all over the place, but in this particular case, I think the landowner that he was talking about was in Oklahoma, and they changed the timing of fire to the fall on their ranch, and they noticed in the first year or two that they didn't have to spray for fields for sericea that they were burning in the fall compared to the ones that they were burning in the spring. So
Hmm.
that changing that timing even reduced the dependence. And then he said a bunch of landowners started doing that, and it seems to be a real trend. We'll talk to him in more detail about that because I think they have some data collected on it and everything. But that's one potential benefit of fall burning is it may help you to achieve an objective like control of that particular exotic that can be really, really problematic. I know we both talked
I'll
about a ton of other things, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just throw in there real quickly that I have some data from Georgia on a project that we're wrapping up that shows that burning during late winter, early spring has no effect on coverage of sericea.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just
So that sounds consistent. I think I've heard Craig talk about some data in Tennessee similar to that. So, yeah, if burning in the typical March, April time
mhm.
frame is definitely not negative, and in some cases might even promote sericea, but it sounds like the fall burning was really negative to sericea.
Yeah,
That being said, there's other data on fall burning, and we're both part of a bigger project that's evaluating this more extensively. But I think there are some general patterns that we can draw from the different studies that we are aware of and have been a part of. We pretty typically see better hardwood control uh, in the fall burn window than other times. Uh, However, some of the studies I've been involved with have shown pretty strong hardwood control, particularly of sweet gum, even during the summer. So,
mhm.
like midsummer burning. I haven't seen the broad scale project data on that, but I seem to be gathering that we're seeing better hardwood control in particularly the fall, even compared to the summer. Is that accurate? I think you've been closer to that
Yeah,
data.
I don't want to speak in absolutes on that data yet.
Yeah,
It's potentially going to be a little bit better, but it's not going to be on the level that people are maybe accustomed to achieving with herbicide,
yeah,
right? So it can help,
hmm,
control woody stems in the understory compared to burning during the late dormant season when
yeah,
people typically burn, but it's not gonna give you an herbicide like effect on woody vegetation.
right. I've been working with a number of landowners that have started. They've expanded their burn window to include fall, and a lot of them swear by it. I mean,
Yeah,
like they like the way it looks. They like the control on some of the species like sweet gum, and they also like the way it looks when we get around to brood time.
yeah,
So I think there are definitely some benefits. I think the major one is that it relaxes the burn window so that you can just think of when I have a burn day, I can use my burn days.
yeah,
So I think that's one major benefit. Another thing that has been talked about in the literature a little bit, and I've heard Craig talk about it a good bit, we typically see a stronger forb response from
yeah.
that fall timing. So
Very
again,
desirable from a brood rearing cover
yes,
perspective.
yeah. So you typically get desirable forb response and better suppression of unwanted encroaching species.
Yeah.
It,
What I like about it from a brooding perspective too is broods are going to use areas that were very recently disturbed,
mhm,
right? And when you go in and implement a typical winter burn, depending on the area that you're in, the stand condition, the weather, of course, all sorts of things. Oftentimes, when we burn during that time of the year, you know, obviously that falls in that category of being recently disturbed, but it was almost, I see several cases where it's so recently disturbed that there's not enough cover in there for poults to really use it yet. Like I worry about them from a predation standpoint when it's burned during the winter and then they're trying to brood in it that spring. The benefit of the fall burning is that it gives you a little bit more time for some structure development prior to that brooding period the next spring.
Yeah.
So it's super recent, but not as recent as a winter burn that provides very little cover that spring.
That's a good point.
One other thing that I did want to go back to, and I'll just hit it real quick about the Sericea question. My go-to herbicide for that is metsulfuron methyl escort is what I typically recommend if you're going to be broadcast spraying Sericea lespedeza. But be aware that even if you hit it with a broadcast application, you're going to be, there's several studies that show this, that you're not going to completely control it and you're going to need to go back and do some spot spraying.
Yeah. Good point. And I want to talk to Dwayne about this more because he has a lot of experience with folks that have a real big problem with Sericea, but sounds like a lot of the time with these types of management strategies, regardless of what it is, it's not a one and done. Like you're going to have to deal with it a lot.
Yeah. And this particular question came from Triple It, or is it Triple IT? I don't know. Maybe he's in IT, or it's either Triple It. But anyway, he says that there's an enormous community of it throughout his pine stands. So in that situation, I would be looking at having a contract crew come in and broadcast, apply that herbicide either with a skidder sprayer, a tractor sprayer, or a hand crew.
Yeah. It's a good point. Another thing, I think that Mark McConnell, who we've had on the show before, has some interesting work related to, to the benefits of getting rid of Sericea. So maybe we can talk to him about that. Okay, well, I know we didn't cover everything. We're going to cover several other issues that are in here, and we probably got enough for another one of these episodes. So I guess if folks are enjoying these type of episodes, we'll keep doing them. It seems like people wanted us to answer their questions because they gave us a bunch of them. So, I guess if you haven't rated the podcast, take the opportunity to go drop us a note right there if you really like, or maybe you'd rather us not focus on these Q&A sessions. Let us know there, because that's again helping us a lot when we get ratings for the podcast. It's helping us grow the podcast. So take a moment to do that, or you can reach out to us on social media or through email or whatever. So yeah, I think that was pretty solid. Is there anything else you want to add before we conclude this one?
No, I'm good. That was fun. I appreciate getting to interact with listeners this way.
Yeah, it's really fun. Maybe one day we'll start doing them live. Yeah.
All right. I don't know. I mean, I think the only reason people listen to us is because Charlotte makes us sound so good on the back end. If they heard us live, they would be probably much less impressed.
Yeah, we don't want to turn anybody off.
Those 5-star ratings might start to fall off a little bit.
Yeah. I will have to say it. A lot of it probably is attributable to Charlotte. So thank you, Charlotte. Okay. Well, great episode. Hope everybody out there enjoys it. We certainly appreciate all the engagement and the support. Please keep that coming. Please keep helping us share it with everybody you know. All of those things are just helping us keep it going.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.